The fuel line hissed as Captain Lydia Ghost Navarro disconnected it from the F-16's belly tank, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the tremor that had started 3 months ago. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on Nelly's Air Force Base, creating heat mirages that danced across the tarmac like phantom aircraft. She'd been grounded for 97 days now, relegated to fuel truck duty after what the medical board politely termed psychological readjustment complications. What they didn't say, what hung in the air like JP-8 fumes, was that nobody trusted Ghost in a cockpit anymore. The irony wasn't lost on her. Lydia Navarro, who'd flown combat missions over 3 theaters, who'd earned her call sign by appearing out of nowhere to save dying Marines in Helmand Province, was now considered too unstable to pilot anything more complex than a fuel truck. The tremor in her left hand, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look, had cost her everything she'd spent 15 years building. She was securing the fuel cap when the black Suburban rolled up, its windows tinted dark enough to hide secrets. General Marcus Keaton stepped out, his 4 stars catching the harsh desert light. Behind him emerged a collection of colonels and Pentagon types, their pressed uniforms crisp despite the heat. Ghost didn't salute. She was working, and protocol allowed for practical exceptions. Instead, she nodded respectfully and continued her post-fuel inspection, checking for leaks with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 8 deployments. Captain Navarro, Keaton's voice carried the weight of authority, but something else lurked beneath it. Uncertainty, maybe, or desperation disguised as command presence. General, she didn't look up from the fuel panel, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how his presence affected her. The man who'd signed her grounding order, who'd reduced her from warrior to maintenance crew with a stroke of his pen. "We need to talk." Ghost finally raised her eyes, noting how the general's entourage had formed a defensive semicircle, as if expecting threats to materialize from the empty tarmac. Their body language screamed classified, urgent, probably catastrophic. She'd seen that particular combination of fear and authority before, usually right before someone asked her to fly into a situation that had already killed better pilots than her. "Sir, my shift doesn't end until 1800. Union rules." The lie rolled off her tongue easily. There were no union rules for grounded pilots pushing fuel trucks, but she wasn't about to make this easy for him. Keaton stepped closer, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Captain, what I'm about to ask you might sound impossible, but right now you might be the only pilot alive who can pull it off." The fuel line coiled in her hands felt suddenly heavy, pregnant with possibility and dread. Staff Sergeant Rico Martinez watched from the hangar as his former squadron leader faced down the general. He'd flown as Ghost's wingman for 2 tours, had seen her thread an F-16 through mountain passes that would make seasoned pilots weep. Now she was pumping gas, and it made his chest tight with anger he couldn't voice. The unofficial word around base was that Ghost had lost her nerve after the incident in Syria, that the famous pilot who could appear and disappear like smoke had finally met her match in the form of her own mortality. Rico knew better. He'd been there when Ghost had held together a crippled Falcon with nothing but will and muscle memory, nursing it home with 2 engines dead and hydraulics failing. He'd watched her cry exactly once, not for herself, but for the Marine she couldn't reach in time, the one whose radio calls had gone silent 30 seconds before she'd arrived. That wasn't a pilot who'd lost her nerve. That was a pilot who'd found her conscience, and the Air Force didn't know what to do with pilots who felt too much. The conversation between Ghost and Keaton was too far away to hear, but Rico could read the body language. The general was selling something and Ghost wasn't buying. Her posture remained rigid, professional, but Rico caught the micro-expression that crossed her face when Keaton leaned closer. Interest, quickly suppressed. Whatever the general was offering, it had teeth. Technical Sergeant Amy Chen appeared beside Rico, her arms crossed as she observed the standoff. "They're going to ask her to fly," she said without preamble. Chen had a gift for cutting through bullshit that made her invaluable in maintenance and uncomfortable at dinner parties. She's grounded, Rico replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Grounded pilots don't get visits from four-star generals, Chen pointed out. Especially not grounded pilots who happen to be the only person alive who's successfully completed a stealth infiltration of Russian airspace. That particular achievement wasn't in Ghost's official file, of course. Officially, Captain Lydia Navarro had never flown an unauthorized reconnaissance mission deep into Siberian territory to photograph a weapons facility that didn't exist. Officially, she'd been on routine training exercises when her aircraft had mysteriously disappeared from radar for 6 hours. Unofficially, the intelligence she'd gathered had prevented what analysts later called a potential nuclear escalation that could have ended civilization as they knew it. Rico remembered the debriefing afterward, how Ghost had sat perfectly still, while generals and CIA operatives argued over her head about plausible deniability and international incidents. She'd said nothing, answered direct questions with military precision, and never once claimed credit for averting World War III. That was Ghost's way: accomplish the impossible, then act like it was just another Tuesday. If they're bringing her back, Chen continued, it means something's gone sideways. Something big enough that they need a pilot who can fly missions that don't officially exist. The general's entourage was getting restless, shifting weight from foot to foot like racehorses at the starting gate. Whatever timeline they were operating under, it was tight. Rico found himself hopping. Ghost would tell them all to go to hell, would choose the quiet dignity of fuel truck duty over whatever nightmare mission they were about to drop in her lap. But he also knew Ghost, knew that some part of her had been dying a little more each day since her grounding. She was a pilot who couldn't fly, a weapon that had been declared too dangerous for its own good. The conversation ended abruptly. Keaton stepped back, his face unreadable, while Ghost remained perfectly still beside her fuel truck. For a moment, Rico thought she'd said no, that she'd chosen safety over the sky. Then she moved, her hands working to secure the fuel equipment with the same methodical precision she'd always brought to pre-flight checks. She was preparing to leave her post, and that meant only one thing. Ghost was going back to war. Within 30 minutes, the secure briefing room in Building 7 had filled with personnel who officially didn't exist, discussing a situation that had never happened. Ghost sat at the far end of the conference table, her flight suit replaced by dress blues that still carried the creases of long storage. The tremor in her left hand had stopped, as if the proximity to classified information had steadied her nervous system through pure force of will. Colonel Diana Reeves, intelligence officer and professional bearer of bad news, activated the wall display with a gesture that suggested the weight of the world rested in her fingertips. The satellite imagery that appeared showed a landscape that looked like Mars had been crossbred with hell, endless expanses of ice-covered tundra broken by industrial installations that squatted like metal cancers against the white. Siberia, Reeves announced, as if the word itself carried a curse. Specifically, a facility that our intelligence community has been monitoring for the past 18 months. Officially, it's a mining operation. Unofficially, it's the site of the most significant breakthrough in stealth technology since the invention of radar-absorbent materials. Ghost studied the images with the detached interest of a professional. She'd seen plenty of facilities that claimed to be one thing while being something else entirely. In her experience, the more remote and heavily defended a location was, the more interesting its actual purpose tended to be. The installation in the satellite photos was both remote and heavily defended, which made it very interesting indeed. 3 days ago, Reeves continued, we lost contact with an asset inside the facility. Before the blackout, we received intelligence suggesting that the Russians have achieved something we previously thought impossible: true electromagnetic invisibility. Not just radar evasion, but complete spectrum dominance. Aircraft, vehicles, even personnel that simply cannot be detected by any known sensor system. General Keaton leaned forward, his fingers steepled in a gesture that Ghost recognized as his thinking pose. She'd seen it before, usually right before he'd asked her to do something that violated several laws of physics and at least one international treaty. If this technology is real, Keaton said, it represents a paradigm shift in warfare that makes nuclear weapons look like conventional artillery. An enemy that can't be seen, tracked, or targeted is an enemy that's already won. Ghost finally spoke, her voice carrying the flat affect that her colleagues had learned to associate with extreme concentration. "What do you need from me?" The room fell silent except for the barely audible hum of air conditioning and classified electronics. Reeves exchanged glances with Keaton, a wordless communication that suggested they'd rehearsed this moment, but weren't sure they were ready for it. "We need you to go back," Keaton said simply. "Same facility you photographed 2 years ago, but this time we need more than pictures. We need you to get inside, assess the technology, and if possible, acquire samples." Ghost nodded slowly as if she'd expected this request. "Timeline." 72 hours, Reeves replied. "Intelligence suggests they're preparing to move the operation to a more secure location. After that, we lose our window." Aircraft. Modified F-22, configured for extreme-range reconnaissance. Single-seat, minimal support systems, maximum stealth capability. Ghost was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming silently against the table. Finally, she looked up, meeting Keaton's eyes directly. "I'll need my old team for mission planning and support." "Done. And I want full operational autonomy once I'm airborne. No backseat driving from Pentagon desk jockeys." Keaton's smile was thin but genuine. "Captain, if we could backseat drive this mission, we wouldn't need you." The weight of the sky pressed down on Nellie's Air Force Base as Ghost made her way to Hangar 18, where her mount for the impossible waited under armed guard. The modified F-22 Raptor looked like violence made aerodynamic, its angular surfaces designed to scatter radar signals into harmless whispers. Someone had stenciled "Ghost Rider" beneath the cockpit, a call sign within a call sign that made her chest tight with something between pride and terror. Technical Sergeant Chen was performing the pre-flight inspection with the focused intensity of a surgeon, her hands moving across control surfaces and sensor arrays with practiced familiarity. She'd been Ghost's crew chief for 5 years, had nursed damaged aircraft home through sheer force of mechanical will and creative profanity. If Chen said the aircraft was airworthy, it was airworthy. If she had doubts, she'd ground it with a wrench through the engine intake. "How's she look?" Ghost asked, running her own hands along the Raptor's leading edge. The composite materials felt warm despite the night air, as if the aircraft were alive and eager to fly. "Like a $20 million funeral pyre," Chen replied without looking up. "Fuel system's been modified for extreme range, which means you're basically strapping yourself to a flying bomb. Ejection seats been replaced with additional avionics, so if something goes wrong, you're riding it all the way down." Ghost nodded. She'd flown missions with modified ejection systems before. The extra equipment was worth more than her life in terms of strategic value. "Electronics. Bleeding edge and untested," Chen admitted. "New radar system that supposedly can see through the stealth tech you're going to investigate. Emphasis on supposedly. Could work perfectly, could fry your brain, could do both." "Weapons." "None. You're a ghost, remember. Ghosts don't fight, they observe and vanish." The hangar lights cast harsh shadows across the Raptor's angular surfaces, creating patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Ghost climbed the ladder to the cockpit, her movements automatic despite the 3-month absence from flight operations. The interior of the aircraft was familiar yet alien, recognizable controls mixed with experimental systems that hummed with barely contained energy. Staff Sergeant Martinez appeared beside the aircraft, a tablet in his hands and concern etched across his features. He'd been her wingman, her backup, her conscience during their deployment tour. Now he was relegated to mission support, watching from the ground while she flew into situations that had already killed better pilots. "Weather's clear over the target area," he reported, his voice carefully neutral. "Winds at altitude are favorable, visibility unlimited. It's a perfect night for flying into hell." Ghost strapped herself into the ejection seat that wasn't an ejection seat, her hands finding the familiar controls by muscle memory. The aircraft came alive around her, systems awakening with electronic whispers and the deep thrumming of turbofan engines spooling up. Through the heads-up display, she could see Chen backing away from the aircraft, her thumbs raised in the universal signal for "don't die stupidly." "Ghost Rider, this is Control," came the voice in her headset, formal and professional despite the hour. "You are cleared for immediate departure. Good hunting." The Raptor rolled out of the hangar and onto the taxiway, its engines whispering promises of speed and altitude. Ghost performed her final checks with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 8 deployments, verifying that every system was green, every parameter nominal. The runway stretched ahead like a pathway to the stars. At 3:47 hours, Ghost Rider lifted off from Nellis Air Force Base and vanished into the Nevada night, leaving behind only the fatting echo of engines and the prayers of those who watched her go. The Pacific Ocean stretched beneath Ghost Rider like a vast black mirror, broken only by the occasional whitecap that caught starlight and threw it back into the darkness. Ghost flew at 47,000 feet, high enough that the curvature of the Earth was visible through her canopy, the horizon a gentle arc that separated the star-filled sky from the equally star-filled sea. The modified F-22 cut through the thin air with predatory grace, its engines running whisper-quiet in supercruise mode. The first refueling had gone smoothly, a delicate aerial ballet performed in complete radio silence over the North Pacific. The KC-135 tanker had appeared out of the darkness like a mechanical whale, extending its boom with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Ghost had slid her aircraft into position with the kind of muscle memory that transcended conscious thought, the Raptor's fuel tanks drinking deeply from the tanker's reserves. Now she was alone again, tracking northeast toward the Bering Strait with nothing but ocean below and stars above. The cockpit displays painted a picture of her progress in green and amber lights, waypoints counting down like a digital rosary. Each mile brought her closer to Russian airspace, closer to a facility that might hold the key to the future of warfare, closer to a mission that would either cement her legend or end her life. The radio crackled with encrypted communication from AWACS control. Call sign, Overwatch. Ghost Rider Overwatch, Sitrep. Ghost keyed her mic, her voice professional despite the isolation that pressed against her like a physical weight. Overwatch, Ghost Rider, on course, on schedule, all systems nominal. Copy, Ghost Rider. Be advised, we're tracking increased Russian air activity along your planned route. Recommend deviation to alternate approach vector. Ghost checked her navigation display, nodding the suggested course change that would add 30 minutes to her flight time, but avoid a potential encounter with Russian interceptors. The safe play, the smart play, the kind of tactical decision that kept pilots alive and missions successful. Negative Overwatch, maintaining original course. The silence that followed her transmission lasted long enough for Ghost to wonder if the communication link had failed. Finally, Overwatch responded, the controller's voice carefully neutral. Ghost Rider, confirm you are declining recommended course deviation. Affirmative. Original route offers optimal approach angle for target penetration. What she didn't say, what couldn't be transmitted over encrypted channels, was that the original route would take her over a specific point in the Bering Sea where she'd once watched a Russian pilot struggle to save his crippled MiG-29. She'd been on a different mission then, officially a routine patrol that had turned into an international incident, when she'd broken radio silence to guide the Russian pilot to a safe ejection point over water instead of letting him crash into the frozen tundra below. The Russian pilot had lived. Ghost had been written up for violating engagement protocols. Neither of them had spoken of the incident afterward, but she'd kept track of Major Dmitry Volkov through intelligence channels. He'd been promoted twice since their encounter, now commanded a squadron based at Severodvinsk, and had named his youngest daughter Lydia for reasons he'd never explained to his wife. The Bering Strait appeared ahead as a narrow band of lighter darkness between the black masses of Alaska and Siberia. Ghost descended to 30,000 feet, the Raptor responding to her touch like a thoroughbred racehorse eager for the finish line. Her radar warning receiver remained silent. Whatever Russian aircraft were operating in the area, they hadn't detected her approach. At 5:23 hours local time, Ghost Rider crossed into Russian airspace, officially becoming an act of war wrapped in composite materials and classified electronics. The GPS display showed her position as a moving dot against the vast wilderness of eastern Siberia, a technological firefly lost in an analog darkness that stretched for thousands of miles in every direction. The facility appeared on her forward-looking infrared display as a cluster of heat signatures against the frozen landscape, exactly where intelligence had predicted, but somehow smaller than the satellite photos had suggested. Ghost began her approach, the Raptor's engines throttled back to minimum power, her aircraft becoming a whisper against the Siberian wind. What she found there would change everything. The facility squatted in a valley between two ridgelines like a mechanical parasite feeding on the frozen earth. From 20,000 feet, Ghost could see the geometric precision of human engineering imposed on the organic chaos of nature, straight lines and right angles carved into landscape that had known only curves and flowing forms for millions of years. Her forward-looking infrared painted the installation in shades of green and yellow, heat signatures that told stories of industrial activity and human presence. But something was wrong. The intelligence briefing had described a bustling complex with multiple shifts of workers, constant vehicle traffic, and the kind of electromagnetic signature that suggested high-powered research equipment running around the clock. What Ghost saw below her looked more like a ghost town, minimal heat signatures, no vehicle movement, and an electromagnetic profile that barely registered above background levels. "Overwatch, Ghost Rider," she transmitted, her voice tight with professional concern. "Target area appears to be operating at minimal capacity, possible evacuation or shutdown in progress." The response came back immediately, suggesting that someone had been waiting for exactly this report. "Ghost Rider, Overwatch. Continue with mission parameters. Intelligence suggests facility may be operating under enhanced concealment protocols." Ghost banked the Raptor into a wide orbit around the facility, her sensors painting increasingly detailed pictures of the installation below. The main complex consisted of 7 buildings connected by covered walkways, with what appeared to be a landing strip carved into the valley floor. Vehicle tracks in the snow suggested recent activity, but the thermal signature indicated that most of the complex was running on minimal power. She switched to synthetic aperture radar, the Raptor's most advanced sensor system painting a picture that made her breath catch in her throat. The radar return showed massive underground installations extending far below the visible surface structures. Whatever was happening at this facility, the real work was being done beneath hundreds of feet of permafrost and reinforced concrete. Overwatch, Ghost Rider, confirming extensive subterranean construction. Surface facilities appear to be cover for underground operations. Copy Ghost Rider, proceed to Phase 2. Phase 2 meant landing. Ghost had performed dozens of covert landings during her career, touching down on improvised airstrips in hostile territory to insert or extract personnel who officially didn't exist. But those missions had involved prepared landing zones and ground support teams. This was different. a solo insertion onto a frozen runway in the middle of Siberia, with no backup and no extraction plan beyond her ability to get the Raptor airborne again. She lined up on the facility's airstrip, noting that the runway appeared to be in better condition than the thermal imaging had suggested. Someone had been maintaining it, keeping it clear of snow and debris despite the apparent shutdown of surface operations. The landing lights were dark, but her night vision systems painted the approach path in ghostly green detail. The Raptor touched down with barely a whisper, its main gear kissing the frozen runway with the gentleness of a mother's caress. Ghost deployed the drag chute and brought the aircraft to a stop at the far end of the runway, where a cluster of buildings provided some concealment from satellite observation. She killed the engines and sat in the sudden silence, listening to the tick and ping of cooling metal and the distant howl of Siberian wind. Through her canopy, she could see the facility's main buildings, dark windows staring back at her like dead eyes. Whatever secrets this place held, she was about to discover them on foot. Ghost popped the canopy and felt the Siberian cold hit her like a physical blow, air so frigid it seemed to steal the breath from her lungs and replace it with knives. The environmental suit she wore was designed for high-altitude flight, not Arctic exploration, but it would have to suffice. She grabbed her equipment pack and climbed down from the cockpit, her boots crunching on snow that squeaked like styrofoam under her weight. The facility's main entrance was 100 meters away across an open courtyard that offered no concealment from observation. Ghost moved quickly but carefully, her senses hyper-alert for any sign of human presence. The building's exterior showed signs of recent occupation, cleared walkways, maintained equipment, exterior lights that were functional but currently dark. She reached the main entrance and found it unlocked, the heavy steel door swinging open at her touch with a soft pneumatic hiss. Emergency lighting cast pools of red illumination down empty corridors that stretched deeper into the building than the exterior dimensions should have allowed. The air inside was warm, suggesting that life support systems were still operational despite the apparent abandonment. Ghost moved through the facility with practiced stealth, her equipment scanning for electronic devices, chemical signatures, and any indication of what kind of research had been conducted here. The surface level appeared to be administrative, offices, meeting rooms and dormitories that showed signs of recent occupation but no current inhabitants. The real secrets, she knew, lay underground. She found the elevator bank in the building's central core, heavy industrial units designed to carry both personnel and equipment to the subterranean levels. The control panel showed 6 floors below ground, labeled in Cyrillic characters that her translation software converted to bland designations: storage, processing, research, development, testing, and deep storage. Ghost selected deep storage and felt the elevator begin its descent into the Earth's frozen heart. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor that belonged in a science fiction film, all brushed metal and glowing control panels that hummed with barely contained energy. The temperature was precisely controlled, the air filtered and recycled, until it carried no scent beyond the metallic tang of advanced electronics. This was a place where serious science happened, where researchers pushed the boundaries of human knowledge without regard for international treaties or moral constraints. Ghost moved deeper into the complex, her sensors painting increasingly disturbing pictures of the facility's purpose. Laboratory spaces equipped with electromagnetic field generators powerful enough to distort local gravity. Testing chambers lined with materials that absorbed radiation across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And everywhere, the lingering traces of experimentation that had pushed the laws of physics to their breaking point. In the deepest laboratory, she found what she'd come for. The device sat in the center of a circular chamber, suspended in a web of superconducting cables and monitoring equipment that tracked its every electronic heartbeat. It was smaller than she'd expected, roughly the size of a briefcase, but the readings from her equipment suggested that it contained more advanced technology than most countries possessed in their entire military arsenal. This was it, the breakthrough that could render every stealth aircraft, every radar system, every sensor network completely obsolete. A device that could bend electromagnetic radiation around an object so completely that it became invisible to every known detection method. Ghost began photographing the device and its supporting equipment, her camera capturing details that intelligence analysts would spend months decoding. She was reaching for a sample of the exotic materials when footsteps echoed in the corridor behind her. She turned to find Major Dmitry Volkov standing in the laboratory entrance, older than she remembered but unmistakably the same pilot she'd saved over the Bering Sea. He wore a Russian Air Force uniform with the insignia of a squadron commander, and his right hand rested casually on the grip of a service pistol. "Hello, Ghost," he said in accented but perfect English. "I've been waiting for you." The two pilots stood facing each other across the laboratory like gunslingers in a Western film, the impossible device humming between them like a mechanical heart. Ghost's hand moved imperceptibly toward her sidearm while calculating angles, cover options, and the probable outcome of a firefight in a confined space filled with experimental technology that could vaporize them both. Volkov seemed to read her thoughts. "Please don't," he said, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who'd seen too much war and lost too many friends. "I didn't come here to kill you, Lydia." The use of her real name instead of her call sign hit her like a physical blow. In their brief encounter over the Bering Sea, they'd communicated through brief radio transmissions and hand signals. He shouldn't know her identity, shouldn't have been able to track her career or learn the details of her personal history. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "2 years," Volkov replied. "Since my intelligence service identified you as the pilot who photographed this facility during your unauthorized reconnaissance mission. They wanted to file a formal protest with your government, but I convinced them that would be counterproductive." Ghost kept her hand near her weapon but didn't draw. Something in the Russian pilot's manner suggested that this encounter was about more than duty or patriotism. "Why?" Volkov gestured toward the device that dominated the laboratory's center. "Because I knew that eventually your government would send you back, and when they did, I wanted to be here to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "This device," Volkov said, moving closer to the humming machinery, "is not what your intelligence services believe it to be. Yes, it can create electromagnetic invisibility. Yes, it could revolutionize stealth technology. But it also does something else, something that my government considers far more valuable than military applications." Ghost's equipment was still recording, still cataloging the technical specifications of everything in the laboratory. Whatever Volkov was about to reveal, it would be transmitted back to American intelligence within hours of her return to friendly airspace. "It creates temporal displacement," Volkov continued. "Microscopic, measured in nanoseconds but consistent and controllable. An aircraft equipped with this technology doesn't just become invisible to radar, it becomes invisible to time itself, existing in a quantum state that makes it effectively untouchable by any weapon system." The implications hit Ghost like a sledgehammer. An aircraft that existed outside normal time couldn't be targeted by missiles, couldn't be intercepted by enemy fighters, couldn't be stopped by any conventional defense. It would be the ultimate first-strike weapon, capable of delivering nuclear payloads without any possibility of retaliation. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Volkov's smile was sad and infinitely tired. "Because they're not just building one device, Lydia. They're building 1,000. And once they're deployed, the balance of power that has kept our nations from destroying each other will be gone forever." Ghost stared at the device with new understanding, seeing not just advanced technology but the potential end of mutual assured destruction. the delicate balance of terror that had prevented global nuclear war for 70 years. In the wrong hands, this technology could tip the scales toward a first strike that no nation could survive. "There's something else," Volkov said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Something that will make your extraction considerably more difficult." Before Ghost could ask what he meant, alarm klaxons began wailing throughout the facility, and emergency lights bathed the laboratory in pulsing red illumination. Over the facility's intercom system, a voice spoke in rapid Russian, the words overlapping and urgent. Volkov translated unnecessarily. "Intruder detected. Facility lockdown initiated. All personnel to emergency stations." Ghost felt the weight of the mission settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She was trapped in an underground facility in the middle of Siberia, surrounded by technology that could end civilization, facing a Russian pilot who seemed to know more about her mission than she did herself. The real mission was just beginning. Emergency lighting cast blood-red shadows across the laboratory as Ghost and Volkov stood frozen in a tableau of mutual recognition and shared dread. The facility's lockdown protocols were engaging throughout the complex, blast doors sealing corridors, ventilation systems switching to emergency filtration, and security systems that had been dormant suddenly coming online with electronic menace. "How long do we have?" Ghost asked, her training overriding the surreal nature of the situation. Enemy pilot or not, Volkov was currently her best source of intelligence about the facility's security measures. 15 minutes until the security teams reach this level," Volkov replied, moving to a wall-mounted control panel and entering a series of codes that stopped the immediate lockdown sequence. "The facility is designed to contain threats, not necessarily to eliminate them quickly. They'll want to capture you alive for interrogation." Ghost was already packing her equipment, her movements efficient despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The photographs and sensor readings she'd collected represented months of intelligence work, but they were worthless if she couldn't get them back to American forces. "Is there another way out?" "Emergency evacuation tunnel that leads to a vehicle depot 2 kilometers from here," Volkov said, then paused. "But I should warn you, using it will trigger additional security protocols that will make your aircraft extraction impossible." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Ghost's F-22 represented her only viable means of escape from Russian territory, but reaching it would require traversing 2 kilometers of open ground while evading security forces that knew the terrain far better than she did. The alternative, attempting to hide in the facility until the security alert ended, was even less appealing. "What's your play here, Volkov?" she asked directly. "Are you helping me or just buying time until your people arrive?" The Russian pilot was quiet for a moment, studying the temporal displacement device with an expression that mixed scientific fascination with moral horror. 6 months ago, I was briefed on the operational deployment schedule for this technology. The first production units will be installed in strategic bombers within 90 days. My squadron has been selected to receive the initial aircraft. Ghost understood the implication immediately. Volkov would be flying missions with technology that could potentially end human civilization, carrying weapons that no defense could stop or counter. For a career military officer, even one who served a different flag, that represented a burden that few could bear. "So you're having second thoughts about ending the world?" she asked. "I'm having second thoughts about my daughter growing up in a world where her father helped make nuclear war inevitable," Volkov replied. "There are some victories that cost more than defeat." The facility's intercom crackled with updates in Russian, Volkov translating the key points in terse, military language. "Security teams have cleared levels 1 through 3. They're moving systematically, checking every room, every possible hiding place. We have perhaps 10 minutes before they reach this level." Ghost made her decision with the kind of instinctive certainty that had kept her alive through 8 combat deployments. "Show me the evacuation tunnel." Volkov led her through a maze of corridors that seemed to exist in defiance of the facility's surface dimensions, deeper into the earth than any building had a right to extend. The architecture down here was purely functional: reinforced concrete walls, industrial lighting, and air handling systems that moved atmosphere through the complex like mechanical lungs. They reached a heavy security door marked with radiation warnings in multiple languages. Volkov's access codes opened locks that had probably never been tested outside of installation procedures, revealing a tunnel that stretched into darkness beyond the reach of their flashlights. The tunnel connects to a vehicle depot that serves as a secondary evacuation point, Volkov explained. From there, you can reach your aircraft, but the route will take you through active security patrols. Ghost checked her equipment one final time, ensuring that the intelligence she'd gathered was secure and transmittable. The photographs of the temporal displacement device alone would revolutionize American understanding of Russian capabilities, but the technical specifications her sensors had recorded could potentially allow for countermeasures to be developed. "Why should I trust you?" she asked Volkov directly. "For all I know, this tunnel leads straight to a holding cell." Volkov's answer came in the form of action rather than words. He removed his service pistol from its holster and handed it to her grip first, a gesture that violated every protocol of military engagement but spoke volumes about his intentions. "Because," he said simply, "some things are more important than the uniforms we wear." Ghost accepted the weapon, nodding that it was loaded and ready to fire. In the tactical calculus of her situation, Volkov had just shifted from potential threat to unlikely ally, a development that would have been impossible to predict, but wasn't unprecedented in her experience. War had a way of creating strange partnerships between people who should have been enemies. They entered the tunnel together, emergency lighting clicking on in response to their movement, and revealing a passageway that stretched into the Siberian darkness like a concrete throat. Behind them, the sounds of systematic search grew closer, security teams moving through the facility with the methodical precision of professionals who knew their job and intended to do it well. The hunt was on, and Ghost was running out of places to hide. The evacuation tunnel stretched ahead of them like a throat leading into the Earth's frozen belly, emergency lighting creating pools of harsh illumination, separated by stretches of absolute darkness. Ghost moved with practiced stealth, her boots silent on the concrete floor, despite the urgency that pressed against her like a physical weight. Behind them, the sounds of the security search grew fainter, but more systematic, voices echoing through the facility's corridors as teams cleared each level with military precision.